The Zephyrian warship Crimson Talon drifted through the debris field of what had once been a human research station. Captain Vextar examined the wreckage through the main viewport, his 4 eyes scanning for anything of value. The attack had been swift and brutal, exactly as the High Command had ordered. No survivors were expected, but protocols demanded a thorough sweep. "Captain!" Communications Officer Zilthak called from her station, her voice carrying the slight whistle that marked her species. "We're detecting a faint life sign from Sector 7 of the wreckage." Vextar's mandibles clicked in annoyance. Survivors meant paperwork, interrogation protocols, and delayed returns to base. Still, any human captive could provide valuable intelligence about Earth's defensive capabilities. The war had been raging for 3 cycles now, and information was as precious as ammunition. "Deploy a recovery team," he ordered. "Bring whatever's left to the medical bay." The recovery took less than an hour. The human they brought aboard was barely conscious, sealed in an emergency pod that had somehow survived the station's destruction. Medical Officer Kethrau reported that the specimen was male, approximately 30 Earth years old, and suffering from severe decompression injuries and radiation exposure. "Will he survive?" Vextar asked, studying the unconscious figure on the medical table. Humans were smaller than Zephyrians, but this one seemed particularly lean, with scars that suggested military experience. "With our medical technology, yes," Kethrau replied. "Though it will take several cycles for full recovery. I've placed him in induced stasis for now." Vextar nodded. "Inform Command that we have a human prisoner. Continue course for Kepler Station." 3 days later, the human awoke. Vextar was summoned to the medical bay when the prisoner regained consciousness, curious to see what manner of creature had earned Earth's reputation for stubborn resistance. The human sat upright on the medical table, his gray eyes taking in his surroundings with calm assessment. No panic, no desperate questions, just quiet observation. This impressed Vextar more than he cared to admit. "I am Captain Vextar of the Zephyrian Third Fleet," he announced in accented standard. "You are aboard the warship Crimson Talon, and you are our prisoner." The human met his gaze steadily. "I understand. Your name and rank?" Vextar demanded. A pause. Then, "Marcus Chin, Lieutenant Commander, Earth Defense Force." Vextar's research officer, N.Y.M. Rao, consulted his datapad. "No record of that name in our intelligence files, Captain." "Your assignment at the research station?" Vextar continued. "Security consultant," Chen replied. "I was reviewing their defensive protocols when you attacked." It was a reasonable cover story, and Vextar had no immediate way to verify it. The human seemed cooperative enough, though there was something in his eyes that suggested depths yet unexplored. Over the following days, as they traveled toward Kepler Station, Vextar found himself returning to the medical bay more frequently than necessary. The human, Chen, was recovering remarkably well. Zephyrian medical technology was advanced, but human resilience seemed to exceed their projections. Chen answered questions readily enough, providing tactical assessments of human military capabilities that seemed genuine but revealed nothing truly sensitive. He was polite, almost friendly, discussing everything from Earth's climate to human cuisine with apparent openness. "Your species fascinates me," Vextar admitted during one visit. "We expected humans to be more emotional, more prone to despair in captivity." Chen smiled, an expression that Vextar was learning indicated amusement rather than threat. "We're adaptable. It's one of our better qualities." "Indeed. Tell me, what do humans do for entertainment during long voyages?" "Stories, mostly. Games. Music. We're social creatures." "Stories? Like historical accounts?" "Sometimes. Often we prefer fiction. Made-up tales of adventure and heroism." Vextar found this concept strange but intriguing. Zephyrian culture valued only factual accounts, considering fictional narratives a waste of mental resources. Yet humans seemed to thrive on these imaginary tales. "Would you share one of these stories?" Vextar asked. Chin considered this. "There's an old Earth story about a soldier who returns from war, but nobody recognizes him because he's been changed by his experiences. He has to prove his identity through his actions rather than his appearance. Why would war change someone so dramatically? War changes everyone, Chen said quietly. Sometimes in ways that can't be seen from the outside. Something in the human's tone made Vextar study him more carefully. There was a weight to those words that spoke of personal experience. As they neared Kepler Station, Vextar received new orders. Command was pleased with the capture and wanted Chen transferred to the Intelligence Division for enhanced interrogation. Vextar felt an unexpected pang at this news. The human had been an interesting companion during the voyage, and enhanced interrogation was rarely a pleasant process for the subject. We arrive at Kepler Station tomorrow, he informed Chen during his final visit. You'll be transferred to intelligence for further questioning. Chen nodded calmly. I expected as much. They will not be as conversational as I have been. I understand. That night, Vextar found himself unable to rest. Something about the human bothered him, some detail he couldn't quite identify. Chen had been too calm, too accepting. Most prisoners showed some signs of stress or fear, even when attempting to hide it. But Chen displayed none of the subtle physiological indicators Vextar had learned to recognize. He pulled up Chen's file again, studying the sparse details. Security consultant at a research station. It was plausible, but something felt wrong. Vextar accessed the ship's communication logs, reviewing the distress signals they'd intercepted before attacking the station. Most were standard emergency broadcasts, but one caught his attention. It had been transmitted on a military frequency, heavily encrypted. His communications officer had noted it but hadn't been able to decrypt the message. The timestamp showed it had been sent just minutes before the attack commenced. Curious, Vextar tried running the signal through the ship's analytical systems. The encryption was beyond their capabilities to break quickly, but he could analyze the transmission characteristics. The signal strength suggested it had been sent from the station's main communication array, not from an escape pod or emergency beacon. Someone at the station had known the attack was coming and had sent a warning to Earth Defense Forces. Vextar felt his blood chill as pieces began falling into place. A security consultant who showed no fear. A man with military bearing who claimed to be reviewing defensive protocols. A mysterious encrypted transmission sent moments before the attack. He rushed to the ship's computer core and began searching through Earth Defense Force personnel files that they'd captured in previous raids. The search parameters were broad, but he added filters for special operations, intelligence, and high-value targets. The result made his hands shake. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen, Callsign, Reaper, Special Operations Division. Classification Level, Omega. Note: extreme caution advised. Subject responsible for single-handedly destroying Zephyrian forward base at Proxima Station. Presumed killed in action during deep reconnaissance mission. The file included a detailed service record that painted a picture of a man who was anything but a simple security consultant. Chen had been involved in some of humanity's most daring military operations. His call sign, Reaper, had been earned through a series of impossible missions behind enemy lines, each one resulting in significant Zephyrian losses. And they had captured him. Or had they? Vextar's mind raced as he considered the implications. If Chen truly was the legendary Reaper, then his presence at that research station hadn't been coincidental. The station hadn't been a target of opportunity, it had been bait. And they had walked directly into the trap. But why would Earth sacrifice a valuable research facility and risk their best operative just to get him aboard a single Zephyrian ship? The answer came to him with horrible clarity. Kepler Station wasn't just any installation. It was the primary coordination hub for the entire Third Fleet, housing strategic planning databases, fleet movement schedules, and communication encryption keys. If someone could access those systems from the inside. Vextar activated the ship's internal communication system. All hands to battle stations. Security teams to the medical bay immediately. Prisoner is to be considered extremely dangerous. But even as he gave the orders, he suspected they were already too late. The Reaper had been among them for days, observing, learning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The lights went out. Emergency illumination flickered on, bathing the ship in an eerie red glow. Vextar heard the sound of distant explosions and felt the ship shudder. His communication attempts to the bridge met with static. Through the ship's corridors, he could hear the distinct sound of Zephyrian weapons fire, but it was sporadic, confused. His crew was shooting at shadows, trying to hit a target that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. A new sound reached his ears, something that made his blood freeze. It was barely audible over the chaos, but unmistakable to anyone who had studied human military tactics. Whistling. Someone was whistling a human tune as they moved through his ship, and Vextar knew with absolute certainty that his crew was being hunted by something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The research station had been bait, and they had taken it willingly. Now they were trapped in space with Earth's most deadly operative, and he was no longer pretending to be their cooperative prisoner. The hunt had begun, and Vextar was beginning to understand why humans called this man the Reaper. The whistling echoed through the ship's corridors like a death song. Vextar pressed himself against the wall of the computer core, his weapon drawn but trembling in his hands. The melody was hauntingly simple, a human tune he didn't recognize, but it chilled him to his core. Through his communication implant, he caught fragments of panic transmissions from his crew. Security teams were reporting contact with the prisoner, but their reports made no sense. The human was simultaneously in engineering, the weapons bay, and the crew quarters. Impossible unless... Captain, came a whispered transmission from Security Chief Morthak. The human isn't alone. There must be multiple infiltrators aboard. Vextar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command crushing down on him. His crew didn't understand what they were facing. Marcuschin, the Reaper, wasn't just dangerous because of his combat skills. He was a master of psychological warfare, capable of making a ship's own systems work against it. The lights flickered again, and in that moment of darkness, Vextar caught a glimpse of movement at the far end of the corridor. A shadow that moved too quickly, too purposefully to be anything but human. Morthak, he whispered into his communicator. Stop spreading your forces thin. The prisoner is alone, but he's using the ship's systems against us. All teams converge on the bridge. Protect the command crew at all costs. Understood, Captain? But, as Vextar began making his way toward the bridge, he realized that Chen's psychological tactics were already working. His crew was jumpy, firing at shadows, wasting ammunition, and revealing their positions. The human was herding them like prey, isolating individuals and eliminating them one by one. The ship's internal sensors had been systematically disabled, section by section. Life support was fluctuating in seemingly random patterns, creating hot spots and cold zones that forced crew members to abandon their posts. Most disturbing of all, the ship's automated systems were beginning to work against them. Doors sealed without authorization. Lifts stopped between decks. Environmental controls created fog banks that provided perfect cover for a hunter. Vextar reached the bridge to find his command crew barricaded behind makeshift fortifications. Navigator Zilthak looked up as he entered, her face pale with fear. Captain, the human has taken control of sections 7 through 12. We've lost contact with 23 crew members. Life signs are unclear. Dead? Vextar asked bluntly. Unknown. The internal sensors are malfunctioning. But, Captain... She hesitated. I think he's toying with us. Before Vextar could respond, his communications officer called out. Captain? Incoming transmission from the human. Put it through. The bridge speakers crackled, and then Marcus Chen's voice filled the air, calm and conversational as if they were still chatting in the medical bay. Hello, Captain Vextar. I hope you're beginning to understand your situation. What do you want, human? Vextar growled. What I've always wanted. To complete my mission. You see, that research station you destroyed? It was indeed bait, but not in the way you think. We knew you would investigate, and we knew you would take a prisoner if you found one. The question was whether we could get the right prisoner into the right hands. You're saying you orchestrated your own capture? A soft laugh came through the speakers. Captain, I've been planning this operation for 6 months. Every detail, from the station's apparent vulnerability to the specific intelligence you would find in your initial sweep. You performed exactly as predicted. Vextar felt his heart sinking. What is your mission? To reach Kepler Station, of course. And you're going to take me there? Never. Oh, but you are. You see, your ship is now mine in all but name. I control life support, internal sensors, and weapons systems. Your crew is scattered and demoralized. I could kill you all within the hour, but that would leave me with a ship full of bodies and no way to dock at Kepler Station without raising suspicions. The brutal logic was undeniable. If Chin killed the crew, he would be trapped aboard a ship he couldn't properly operate, facing a hostile station that would destroy him rather than risk boarding action. What guarantee do we have that you won't kill us anyway? Vextar asked. My word as an Earth Defense Force officer. Complete this journey as planned, deliver me to Kepler Station, and your crew lives. Attempt to betray me or warn the station, and I'll demonstrate why they call me the Reaper. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Vextar looked around at his remaining command crew, seeing his own despair reflected in their faces. Options? He asked quietly. We could set the ship to self-destruct, suggested Tactical Officer Rex Nal, and guarantee our deaths while potentially allowing him to escape in a pod? Unacceptable. We could attempt to send a warning to Kepler Station, offered Zilthak. He controls our communications. Any message we send, he can intercept and modify. The bridge fell quiet again as they contemplated their impossible situation. They were trapped with a predator who held all the advantages, forced to cooperate in their own destruction. Captain, Morthak's voice crackled through the communicator. We've found 3 of our missing crew members. They're alive but unconscious. The human didn't kill them, just neutralized them. This information changed everything. If Chun was keeping prisoners alive, it suggested he was serious about his promise to spare them if they cooperated. But it also demonstrated his complete confidence in his ability to control the situation. Over the next several hours, a strange routine developed aboard the Crimson Talon. The ship continued toward Kepler Station as scheduled, but under the watchful presence of an invisible hunter. Chin moved through the ship like a ghost, occasionally leaving evidence of his passage, a disabled security camera here, a rerouted power coupling there, just enough to remind them that he was still there. The psychological pressure was immense. Crew members jumped at shadows, started at unexpected sounds, and clustered together in groups for mutual protection. But Chin made no aggressive moves. He had made his point, and seemed content to let fear do the rest of his work for him. Vextar found himself almost admiring the human's tactics. It was psychological warfare of the highest order, designed to break an enemy's will without unnecessary bloodshed. The fact that Chin could kill them all but chose not to made his threat even more terrifying. On the second day of their captivity, Chin made contact again. Captain, I thought you might like to know that your crew is performing admirably under pressure. Military discipline is holding, and morale hasn't collapsed completely. You should be proud. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand that I'm not your enemy, Captain. I'm a soldier following orders, just as you are. This conflict between our species was not of my choosing, but I will do my duty. Your duty involves infiltrating our most secure installation. It does. But it also involves minimizing unnecessary casualties. Your crew will survive this encounter if you continue to cooperate. There was something in Chen's tone that suggested genuine regret about the situation. It was the voice of a man who had seen too much war, who understood the cost of every action but was committed to seeing his mission through regardless. What happens at Kepler Station? Vextar asked. That depends on what I find there. Intelligence suggests that your command is planning a major offensive against Earth's outer colonies. If I can confirm this and gather the operational details, I can save a lot of lives on both sides. How does preventing our offensive save Zephyrian lives? Because if we know where and when you're coming, we can prepare defenses that will stop you without requiring a counterattack against Zephyrian civilian targets. Defensive warfare is always preferable to offensive campaigns, Captain. Fewer lives are lost on both sides. The conversation ended, leaving Vextar with much to consider. The human's logic was sound, even from a Zephyrian perspective. If Earth could predict and counter their offensive, it would indeed save lives on both sides by avoiding the escalating retaliation cycles that had characterized the war so far. But it would also mean the failure of a campaign that the High Command had been planning for over a year. The political consequences for Vextar and his crew would be severe. As if reading his thoughts, Chen's voice returned to the speakers. Captain, there's something else you should consider. The research station you destroyed, the one where you captured me? It wasn't just bait for your ship. It was also the primary communication relay for Earth's intelligence network in this sector. Vextar felt his blood chill. Meaning? Meaning that Earth Command lost contact with this entire region when you destroyed it. They don't know I succeeded in boarding your ship, and they won't know until I report back. If my mission fails, if I don't return with the intelligence from Kepler Station, Earth will assume the worst and launch a preemptive strike against every Zephyrian installation in this sector. You're lying. Check your long-range sensors, Captain. Look for Earth Defense Force patrol patterns around Proxima, Centauri, and Wolf systems. You'll find they've been significantly reinforced in the past week. Vextar gestured to his sensor operator, who began scanning the indicated systems. The results appeared on the main screen within minutes, showing massive Earth military buildups in all three locations. They're preparing for war, Zilthak whispered. They're preparing to defend themselves, Chin corrected through the speakers. But if they don't hear from me within the next 6 days, those defensive positions become staging areas for the largest human offensive since the war began. The implications were staggering. Chin wasn't just threatening to gather intelligence about Zephyrian plans. He was offering to prevent a catastrophic escalation of the entire conflict. His success or failure would determine whether the war continued as a series of limited engagements or exploded into total warfare between both species. You're holding the entire sector hostage, Vextar said. I'm offering you a chance to save millions of lives, Captain. Help me complete my mission, and this war might actually end with something resembling peace rather than mutual annihilation. As the Crimson Talon continued toward Kepler Station, Vextar found himself trapped between impossible choices. Cooperate with the human and betray his own species, or resist and potentially trigger the very conflict escalation that Chin claimed to be trying to prevent. Either way, he was beginning to understand that Marcus Chin, the Reaper, had planned for every contingency. The man who had seemed like a simple prisoner had orchestrated events on a scale that encompassed entire star systems. And they were all dancing to his tune. The final approach to Kepler Station began, and Vextar realized that the real test was yet to come. Everything up to this point had been preparation. Now they would discover what the Reaper truly intended to do with the most secure military installation in Zephyrian space. Kepler Station hung in space like a massive metal flower, its 6 arms extending from a central hub that housed the Third Fleet's primary command center. As the Crimson Talon approached the docking bay, Vextar watched the station's defensive systems track their ship with automated precision. Hundreds of weapon emplacements could reduce his vessel to scrap metal in seconds if they detected any threat. Somewhere aboard his ship, Marcus Chin was preparing for the most dangerous phase of his mission. Station control to Crimson Talon, came the voice of Dock Master Kelnath. You're early, Captain Vextar. We weren't expecting you for another 12 hours. Vextar glanced at his communications officer, who nodded to indicate that Chin was not interfering with their transmissions, at least not yet. We completed our sweep ahead of schedule, Vextar replied. Requesting priority docking for prisoner transfer. Acknowledged. Base 7 is being prepared. Intelligence Division has been notified. As they docked, Vextar found himself hoping that Chin would simply disappear into the station and that this nightmare would end. But he knew better. The Reaper had gone to extraordinary lengths to reach this moment, and he wouldn't simply fade into the background now. The docking procedure went smoothly, with station personnel none the wiser about the deadly predator that had just been delivered into their midst. Chin had remained silent throughout the final approach, giving no indication of his intentions. 2 hours after docking, Intelligence Director Thexelon arrived to collect the prisoner. Vextar met him in the medical bay, where Chin sat calmly on the examination table, looking like nothing more than a tired human awaiting transport. "So this is the human you captured," Thexelon said, circling Chin like a predator studying prey. "He doesn't look particularly impressive." "Appearances can be deceiving," Vextar replied carefully. "Indeed. All humans look weak to me. But Command is interested in what this one might know about Earth's defensive capabilities." Thexelon activated a neural restraint device. "This will ensure he remains cooperative during transport." As the device was fitted around Chen's head, the human met Vextar's eyes for a brief moment. There was no fear there, no desperation. Only calm acknowledgement, and something that might have been gratitude. Then, Chin was led away, and Vextar was left wondering if he had just signed the death warrant for everyone on Kepler Station. The answer came 18 hours later. Vextar was reviewing supply manifests when the station's emergency alarms began screaming. Red lights bathed the corridors as the automated systems announced a security breach in the intelligence section. "All personnel to emergency stations," came Thexelon's voice over the station-wide communications system. "The human prisoner has escaped custody. Consider him extremely dangerous." But Vextar knew that Chen's escape was only the beginning. The intelligence section housed the Third Fleet's most sensitive data, including the very offensive plans that the human had come to steal. Reports began filtering in from across the station. The human had been spotted in the command center, in the communications array, in the primary computer core. But the sightings were contradictory, impossible. Once again, Chin was using the station's own systems to create confusion and misdirection. "Station control to all ships," came an urgent transmission. "Prepare for immediate departure. Lockdown protocols are in effect." Vextar activated his ship's communications system. "Station control, this is Captain Vextar. What is the situation?" "The human has accessed classified files. We're implementing emergency protocols to prevent data transmission." But even as the words were spoken, Vextar could see new ships arriving in the distance. Earth Defense Force vessels, appearing as if they had been waiting for a signal. The trap had been even more elaborate than he had imagined. Chen's mission wasn't just to steal intelligence, it was to provide targeting data for a rescue operation. "All ships, launch immediately." Thexelon's voice had taken on a note of panic. "Human forces are approaching the station." The next few hours became a nightmare of chaos and violence. The Earth's ships had arrived in sufficient force to challenge the station's defenses, but not enough to guarantee victory. Both sides knew that the battle would be decided by who controlled the station's massive defensive arrays. And Marcus Chin was somewhere inside, still loose, still dangerous. Vextar's ship was among the first to launch, engaging human fighters in the space around the station. But his attention was divided, watching for signs of what was happening inside Kepler Station itself. The answer came in the form of massive explosions that rippled across the station's hull. One by one, the defensive weapon arrays were being destroyed from within. "How is he doing this?" Morthak demanded over the ship's communications system. "One human can't single-handedly sabotage an entire station." "He's not working alone," Vextar replied grimly. "The station's own security systems are working for him now." It was psychological warfare on a scale that defied comprehension. Chin had turned Kepler Station into a weapon against itself, using the Zephyrians' own technology to destroy their defenses from within. But the human ships weren't trying to capture the station. They were providing cover for something else, a single small craft that detached from the main fleet and headed directly for the station's docking bay. "He's leaving," Silthak announced from her sensor station. "The human is evacuating." The realization hit Vextar like a physical blow. Chin had never intended to hold the station or cause unnecessary casualties. He had come for the intelligence data, and now that he had it, he was completing his extraction. The battle continued to rage around Kepler Station, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. With its defensive systems crippled and its most sensitive data stolen, the installation was no longer strategically valuable. As Vextar watched the human ships begin their withdrawal, he received one final transmission on a frequency that only his ship could hear. "Thank you, Captain Vextar." Chen's voice was tired but satisfied. "Your cooperation made this operation possible while saving countless lives on both sides." "What happens now?" Vextar asked. "Now we try to end this war before it destroys both our species. The data I've acquired will show Earth's leadership that continued conflict is futile for the Zephyrian Empire. Your fleets are overextended, your supply lines are vulnerable, and your civilian population is growing tired of a war with no clear objectives. And if our leadership refuses to accept this, then they'll discover that Earth has been preparing for a very different kind of war than the one they think they're fighting. Captain, your people are excellent warriors, but you've never faced an enemy that turns your own strengths against you. Every battle you win makes you weaker, every victory costs you more than you can afford to lose." The transmission paused, and when Chen spoke again, his voice was softer. "But I don't think it will come to that. The data I've stolen includes communications between your high command and civilian leadership. There are those among your people who want peace as much as we do. They just needed proof that continued war would be suicide for both sides." As the human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Vextar found himself contemplating an impossible thought. Had the Reaper's mission actually been one of mercy rather than destruction? In the weeks that followed, his question was answered. The intelligence data that Chen had stolen was transmitted to both Earth and Zephyrian leadership, along with detailed analyses of how the war was affecting both civilizations. The human had been thorough in his research. He had documented supply shortages, civilian casualties, economic disruption, and military losses on both sides. But more importantly, he had provided projections of where the conflict was heading if it continued. The mathematics were stark and undeniable. Continued warfare would result in the collapse of both civilizations within 10 years. Peace negotiations began 3 months later. Vextar was called to testify about his experiences with the human prisoner, and he found himself in the strange position of speaking positively about an enemy who had humiliated him and his crew. But honesty compelled him to admit that Chen had kept his word. Despite being capable of killing everyone aboard the Crimson Talon and, later, everyone on Kepler Station, the human had chosen restraint. "He could have slaughtered us all," Vextar told the Peace Commission. "Instead, he showed us that mercy could be more powerful than violence." The negotiations were long and difficult, complicated by extremists on both sides who preferred continued warfare to uncertain peace. But gradually agreements were reached. Prisoner exchanges, humanitarian aid, limited trade relationships. It was during one of these prisoner exchanges that Vextar saw Marcus Chen again. The human looked older, worn down by the weight of the decisions he had been forced to make. But when he recognized Vextar among the Zephyrian delegation, he offered a tired smile. "Captain," he said simply. "Reaper," Vextar replied, using the human's military call sign for the first time. "That name doesn't seem to fit anymore," Chen observed. "These days, I'm just a soldier trying to figure out what peace looks like. Perhaps we're all learning that lesson." They stood together in comfortable silence, two warriors who had found themselves on opposite sides of a conflict either had chosen, but who had somehow helped bring it to an end. The war officially ended 6 months later with the signing of the Treaty of New Geneva. It established boundaries, trade agreements, and protocols for peaceful contact between human and Zephyrian space. But for Vextar, the war had really ended much earlier, in the medical bay of his ship when he had first spoken with a human prisoner who had shown him that strength could manifest as mercy, and that true victory sometimes meant finding a way for everyone to survive. The man they called the Reaper had indeed brought death, but not in the way anyone had expected. He had killed the war, and in doing so, he had saved two civilizations from destroying each other. Years later, when young Zephyrian officers asked Vextar about the war, he would tell them about the day his ship captured a human prisoner who turned out to be so much more than he seemed. He would tell them about psychological warfare, about turning in enemies' strengths against them, and about the courage it took to show mercy when violence would have been easier. But mostly, he would tell them about the day he learned that the most dangerous weapons in the universe were not the ones that destroyed, but the ones that convinced you to stop fighting in the first place. Marcus Chin had earned his reputation as the Reaper not by killing, but by ending a war that could have consumed both their species. And in the end, that proved to be the most human thing of all.